We finally got a patch where there are some pretty big item changes as Liandry's is nerfed while many other AP items are receiving buffs. The changes will most definitely impact the strength of many champions, so we'll cover who those champs are and provide you guys with an update to the tier list for every single role. And it's no secret that League's ranking system is designed to trap you. It pulls you in with those games where everything clicks and you carry hard, only to balance it with frustrating matches that feel unwinnable from the start. This cycle keeps you grinding, hoping for change, but never quite breaking through. What most players don't realize is that escaping this cycle requires specific skills and strategies tailored to your exact rank. That's where SkillCapped comes in. We're the only service in this industry that has invested millions of dollars into identifying what actually works at every tier. Our challenger coaches have mapped out the best and most useful strategies that turn hard-stuck players into consistent climbers. And you can access all of this expertise for less than $9 a month with our annual plan. We're so confident in our method that our business model depends on your success. Climb at least 5 divisions while actively using SkillCapped or claim a full refund. No questions asked. Stop wasting time on the ranked treadmill. Start climbing today with proven strategies designed specifically to break through your current rank. Check us out by clicking the link in the top right corner or in the description below. And with that being said, let's get into it. So the one item change that is going to negatively affect many different champions for 25.10 is the nerf to Liandry's. AP on the item will be dropping from 70 to 60, so you're losing 200 gold worth of stats from this nerf. The champions who will be most impacted by this nerf are the ones who rely on rushing Liandry's. Amumu, Lilia, Singed, Rumble, Nunu, and Udyr are who will be feeling the effects of this one the most. Liandry's is more commonly slotted in as a second or third pickup on many mages, but it will depend on the champ as to how heavily they are impacted. Champions with damage over time spells like Malzahar, Zyra, Brand, Teemo, and Aurelion Sol are the ones who will be hurting the most by this nerf. Vice versa, champs like Victor, Orianna, and Ahri, who don't really need to build Liandry's to be most effective, should be completely fine, opting for an alternative item in 25.10. One AP item that is getting quite heavily buffed for 25.10 is Bloodletter's Curse. Bloodletters will have its health increased by 50, AP up by 5, and the magic resist shred per stack is going from 5 to 7.5%. You'll also only need 4 stacks to reach the max stacks instead of 6, while the percent shred at max stacks stays the same, so it's all around some really nice buffs to Bloodletters. Now, the thing is, in recent patches, there really weren't a ton of champions prioritizing the item very much, so it's hard to say who would actually want to build the item if it does land in a powerful spot. Rumble, Singed, Mordekaiser, and Lilia are a few champs who ran the item sparingly in recent patches, so they'd be the ones who we'd expect to see the most success with the item. The only issue is that every one of those champions likes Liandry's, so even though Bloodletters is buffed because of the Liandry's nerf, none of those champs will really be much stronger even if they end up going for Bloodletters. Crypt Bloom is going to be changed in a couple of ways for this patch, with its recipe being altered, and cost of the item is going up by 150 gold. AP is being increased from 60 to 75, while the passive heal AP ratio is dropping from 25 to 20%. In terms of offensive output, these changes are definitely a buff because 15 AP has a gold value of 300, while the cost of the item only went up by 150 gold. Of course, the heal is a bit weaker, so that's where the gold efficiency is evened out, but overall, you will be getting more offensive power out of Crypt Bloom for 25.10. Riot's putting more offensive power back on Rocket Belt for this patch. Cost of the item is going up by 50 gold, and the recipe is going to be changed so that you no longer need Kindle Gem, and instead will purchase a Fiendish Codex and a Ruby Crystal. Health on Rocket Belt drops from 350 to 300, however, the AP is up from 60 to 70, and ability haste is going from 15 to 20. So if we break it all down, 50 health has a gold value of 134, 10 AP has a gold value of 200, while 5 haste has a gold value of 250. So you're gaining 450 gold worth of stats while losing 134, which in total means you're gaining 317 gold worth of stats from those adjustments. Factor in the cost of Rocket Belt going up by 50 gold, and in the end, all of these changes amount to you gaining 267 gold worth of stats. So it's definitely a buff to Rocket Belt, and champions who can look to take advantage of this the most include Kennen, Nico, Silas, and Echo. We've got some pretty big changes to Horizon Focus for 25.10, as the AP on the item is going up from 75 to 110. However, the Hyper Shot damage amplifier passive is being completely removed. Recipe is also being changed so that you now need a Blasting Wand instead of an Amp Tome, while cost of the item is up from 2,700 to 2,900 gold. So with the Hyper Shot passive being removed, it's tough to say just by looking at the changes as to whether or not this ends up a buff or a nerf. So we went into Practice Tool on the PBE and compared the damage from 25.10 to 25.9. We're using Xerath as the champion because he's the champ who'd been buying Horizon Focus the most in 25.9. So as you can see here, in 25.9, you're actually dealing more damage, so it's looking like this change is a nerf to Horizon Focus. Maybe we see the item more on shorter range champions now, but on a longer range poke champ like Xerath, who could always proc the Hyper Shot passive, with that being removed, Horizon should be in a weaker state on him. Lichbane users are going to be loving 25.10, especially those who want to rush the item. Needlessly Large Rod is now gone from the recipe, and it's going to be replaced by a Blasting Wand. This will feel so much nicer because having having to save up 1200 gold for a large rod just felt really bad in certain spots. For example, if you had already purchased your Ether Wisp on your first base, your next reset, you would have really wanted 1200 gold for large rod. This is because opting for Sheen before large rod just felt really bad. So if you were stuck on something like 1100 gold and had to grab a Sheen instead of large rod, that just sucked. Well, now with Blasting Wand in the mix, you won't run into those terrible base timers as much anymore and won't have to either sit on a bunch of gold or grab an early Sheen, since Blasting Wand is worth 850 gold. There's another big change as well, and it's the fact that the cost of Lich Bane is going down by 300 gold, while the AP on the item drops from 115 to 100. So even though you're losing 15 AP, it's actually a neutral change gold efficiency-wise, because 15 AP is worth 300 gold. So the fact that you're able to purchase your Lich Bane quicker for no loss in gold efficiency definitely means this is a net buff to Lich Bane for 25.10. We're looking at Evelynn, Katarina, Fizz, Echo, Twisted Fate, Diana, and Nidalee to see a spike in power because of this buff. Storm Surge is being changed in a bunch of different ways, with the cost of the item going down by 100 gold. Movement speed is up from 4 to 6%. However, in exchange, you will no longer receive the bonus movement speed when proccing the Storm Surge passive, and you won't be granted 30 gold if you kill an enemy before the Storm Surge proc goes off. So this one is a lot tougher to tell as to whether it's a buff or a nerf. We can't even test it in Practice Tool because you can't put a definitive value on how much power each of those passives brought. Losing the 25% movement speed proc is definitely quite big, so we'll have to see as to whether or not the cost reduction and the increase in percent movement speed is enough to outweigh that. The next couple of item changes are pretty simple cost reductions, with Luden's Companion seeing its cost lowered from 2,850 to 2,750. Gaining in power due to this buff will be Vex, LeBlanc, Zoe, Aurora, Ziggs, Syndra, Xerath, and Lux. Malignance is going to see a buff to its AP, being increased from 85 to 90. Since Malignance is already quite cheap, it makes sense for Riot to just give it more power instead of reducing the cost even further. 5 AP is worth 100 gold, so in a way, it is the same value of change as what we saw for Luden's. Annie, Lissandra, Ahri, Kassadin, Karma, and Teemo will be the champs who benefit from this buff the most. We have the same cost reduction buff to Morello as what we saw for Luden's, with cost being lowered by 100 gold. This one is pretty unimpactful because you never really want to fully complete Morello anyway, as if you need the heal cut, just sitting on an Oblivion Orb is the way to go. Nashor's Tooth is going to be 100 gold cheaper for this patch. We're really keying in on Echo to be a big winner for 25.10 because his 2-item core will now be 400 gold cheaper if you run Nashor's with Lich Bane. Diana is another champ who has potential with Nashor's Lich Bane core, but Echo is one of the only champs who has been running this setup as his most optimal core in recent patches, so it's much more clear that Echo will be coming out of 25.10 in a much stronger spot. Kayle is actually one other champ who had been rushing a Nashor's into Rabadon's and Lich Bane core, so she's the other champ to watch out for, with that core build being 500 gold less expensive. And the reason it's 500 gold less expensive is because Rabadon's is seeing a cost reduction as well, going from 3,600 to 3,500. For someone like Kayle, who scales so incredibly well, access to her 3-item core 500 gold earlier is actually pretty big. Evelynn will also be liking the fact that her 2-item core in Lich Bane and Rabadon's will be 400 gold less expensive, so expect for Evelynn to gain in power for this patch. Of course, most mages will be liking this Rabadon's buff, but in terms of which champs will gain in power the most for 25.10, it's going to be those who benefit from at least 2 of the item buffs, which is why we are quite high on Echo, Kayle, and Evelynn in specific. And then for the final item change, it's going to Seraph's Embrace, with his base shield of 200 being removed. However, the mana ratio on the shield is being changed from 20% current mana shield to 18% max mana shield. Riot has stated that this will be a net nerf over a large enough sample size, so champs affected by this one include Taliyah, Orianna, Cassiopeia, Ryze, Kassadin, Anivia, and Veigar. So with all the item changes covered, let's head on over to top lane and have a look at the changes for the role. Cho'Gath is actually the only top laner being adjusted for 25.10, as his base attack speed is going up from 0.625 to 0.658. Q damage is dropping, but only at the later ranks. And then Emax health damage is being increased from 2.5 scaling to 3.5% to 3 scaling to 4%. So if you're playing Emax tank Cho'Gath, this is definitely a straight buff for 25.10. If you're playing the Qmax Shurelya's Cho'Gath, then you're going to be slightly weaker. We definitely think that going back to rushing Heartsteel will be the play due to this change, as that E buff is quite significant. So we're going to be moving Cho'Gath up 1 tier for this patch, going from A into S tier. So if we have a look at the top lane tier list, we have a couple of adjustments for 25.10. Kayle is going to be moving up into the OP tier, as like we mentioned when covering the item changes, her core build is getting 500 gold cheaper for this patch, which is pretty massive. We're going to be moving Singed down from S into A tier because he'll be negatively impacted by the Liandry's nerf. Kennen is definitely a pick to watch out for this patch because the Rocket Belt buff is going to positively impact him. For Teemo, it's tough to say whether or not he'll gain or lose power for this patch. On one hand, Liandry Leandry's is nerfed, so he doesn't like that, but Nashor's and Malignants are buffed, so he benefits from those. We're probably looking at Teemo walking away pretty power neutral, so we'll be leaving him in S tier for now. Jungle is the role with the most amount of champion changes for this patch, and first up we've got Kayn. Kayn is nerfed with his health growth being lowered from 109 to 103. So as we can see in the comparison clips, this equates to 102 loss in health at level 18. Definitely not the end of the world for Kayn, and we don't even expect for it to significantly reduce his power level, so we'll be leaving him in the S tier for now. Naafiri is going to have her passive monster damage reduced yet again, and this time it's dropping from 155 to 135%. So we're looking at Naafiri either just barely holding on to her A tier spot or dropping down into B for 25.10. We're leaning more towards her losing that A tier position, so we'll be dropping her into B. Xin Zhao will be losing some armor for this patch as armor growth is going down from 5 to 4.4. So this ends up being a 10 armor loss at level 18, which shouldn't impact Xin Zhao's power at a significant level. We do think there will be a little more separation between him and Jarvan now though, so we'll be dropping Xin from OP into S. Riot has these Vi changes under the adjustment section of the patch, but we're more inclined to believe they'll end up as net nerfs. Q minimum damage is dropping by quite a significant amount, so when you're in a skirmish with Vi and right up close to enemies, that's where this nerf will really come into play. Max damage on Q is going to stay very similar though, so when it comes down to executing ganks with Vi, her damage won't be affected. Our mana cost is being lowered from 100 scaling to 150 to 100 at all ranks, while our damage is down from 150 scaling to 400 to 150 scaling to 350. So overall, we definitely don't see Vi gaining in power due to these changes, but she could very well end up completely neutral. We are leaning more towards a slight loss in power, but we don't think Vi will be in a much weaker state, so she'll remain in the B tier for now. So if we have a look at how the jungle tier list is shaping out, a few notable adjustments include Echo and Evelynn moving up, while Lilia, Amumu, and Nunu are dropping down. So Echo and Evelynn both heavily benefit from the AP item changes as their core builds are becoming 400 gold cheaper. Lilia, Amumu, and Nunu are champs who like to rush Leandry's, so they will be quite negatively impacted by the item losing 10 ability power. We'll be keeping an eye on Diana for this patch to see if a Nashor's into Lichbane core makes a comeback. For a while now, Diana had been liking the Bruiser build with Leandry's as a core pickup, but now that Leandry's is nerfed, while both Lichbane and Nashor's are buffed, we could be in for a big meta shift with Diana builds. So since this patch is so heavily centered around the AP item changes, there's actually no champion changes being issued for any mid laners. Now, even though the AP item changes are going to influence a ton of mid laners, it's really going to depend on the champ as to how much power they'll gain or lose. We're keying in on champs who will benefit from at least 2 of the item buffs, as champs who will only benefit from 1 probably don't see a very big spike in power. Take Ahri for example. If you're going for the Rod of Ages into Leandry's core, then she's actually just weaker for 25.10. If you're going for a Malignance into Shadowflame and Zanya's core, well then it's just the 5 AP increase from Malignance that you're benefiting from. So Ahri is one of those champs who likely doesn't see her power swing much at all for this patch. If anything, it's just build priority that will change, with Malignance overtaking Rod of Ages as her rush item. Echo on the other hand though literally benefits from 3 of the item changes. Lichbane, Nashor's, and Rabadon's are all being reduced in price, with the core now being 500 gold cheaper, so that's massive for someone like Echo who spikes so hard with items. Champs who can rush Lichbane are who we're pretty high on, as the cost of the item is dropping by 300 gold, whereas many of the other cost reductions we're seeing on other items is only by 100 gold. So other than Echo, Katarina, Fizz, and Diana are the mid laners who can rush Lichbane and should be loving the item being cheaper. Twisted Fate is another mid laner who likes Lichbane, but he built it second, so he won't be impacted as heavily as those other 4 champs. It feels like once every year Riot gives a buff to Senna to make her viable again in the ADC role, and they'll be doing just that for 25.10. Soul drop rate from minions and monster kills will be increased from 8.4 to 14%. Passive crit per 20 souls is going up from 8 to 10%. Enchanter builds are nerfed a little bit though, with Q heal AP ratio dropping from 60 to 50%. So in the context of Senna in the ADC role, she's definitely getting stronger for this patch. How much stronger is anyone's guess though, as she had been around a 46% win rate in recent patches, so even if these changes were to land impactful and bump that up by 4 or 5%, she'd be in a good spot, but not overly powerful. So for now, we're going to be placing Senna in the ADC A tier, but we'll be sure to circle back for mid-patch with an update after we get to see the changes on live servers. Smolder is going to receive a few scaling buffs for this patch, as Q damage per stack is being increased from 0.3 to 0.4. Q max health burn damage per 100 stacks is going up from 0.4 to 0.5%. And then E damage per stack is up as well from 10 to 12%. So overall, we don't see these buffs being all that impactful. They could be enough to give Smolder a push into A tier, but realistically, we still see him being an average ADC, and we'll be leaving him in the B tier for now. So if we have a look at the ADC tier list, since it's only 2 champs being adjusted for this patch, the upper echelon will not be changing for the role. Lucian, Trist, and Jinx will remain as the most powerful carries. Meta has stayed pretty consistent for the ADC role for a while now, with Ezreal and Kalista remaining 2 of the worst champs, and then everyone else is at least in a viable spot. So overall, continue playing who you we've been enjoying in recent patches, as there will be no significant shift to the ADC meta. There are a few supports being nerfed for 25.10, and first up is Lulu. Lulu is going to have her armor per level reduced from 4.9 to 4.6, and then her R cooldown is being increased from 100 to 120 seconds at rank 1 in the spell. So it's kind of crazy that Riot has nerfed Lulu multiple times over the past few patches, but none of the nerfs so far have actually led to her win rate dropping. Will we see the same result with these nerfs? Honestly, we wouldn't be too surprised, as they aren't that harsh at all. So despite these nerfs, we are going to be leaving Lulu in the support S tier, but there's a small chance we have to drop her into A for the mid-patch tier list if the nerfs do land more negatively than expected. There are 2 enchanters receiving nerfs for this patch, and the second is Yuumi. Yuumi's base heal on R is being lowered from 35 scaling to 65 to 30 scaling to 50. We don't see this one being all that impactful, so we won't be moving Yuumi further down the tier list, as she'll remain placed in B. And then with Fiddle's support making his way into meta lately, Riot's looking to tone him down a notch for 25.10. Q damage is being lowered with the base max health damage going down, however the AP ratio is being increased. Q fear is being reduced from 1.25 scaling to 2.25 seconds to 1.2 scaling to 2 seconds. W damage AP ratio is going up though from 35 to 40%. So support is definitely weaker due to these adjustments, as the base damage nerfs to Q and fear duration nerf will outweigh the AP ratio buffs. That being said, the nerfs don't even seem that bad, so we expect for Fiddle to remain a competitive pick, and we'll be leaving him in the OP tier for now. So for the support tier list this patch is going to be similar to ADC in the sense that not a whole lot is changing. It's top, jungle, and mid that are impacted the most in 25.10 due to the AP item changes, while ADC and support get to lay low. AP item changes will have a negative influence on a few supports though, notably Zyra and Brand. Zyra and Brand both like to rush Liandry, so with the item losing 10 AP, they will be a bit worse off now. Senna should be completely fine in the support role despite the nerf to her Q heal AP ratio, because her more popular build consists of rushing Black Cleaver anyways, so as long as you aren't building enchanter items, that Q nerf doesn't impact her at all. Alright guys, one last thing, our rank up guarantee is insane. It's like signing up for the gym and getting a refund if you don't get ripped. That's how confident we are in SkillCapped. We obsess over making the best guides with top players, rigorous testing, and top tier video editing to make your climb easy. If you're ready to level up, visit SkillCapped.com and see the difference. So there you have it everyone, that's a complete look at the 25.10 changes and an update to the solo queue tier list for every single role. Thank you all so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.